So we're going to begin with a little meditation motivation, as we've done in the past. And so sit comfortably. I'll emulate Christine. Have a sip of water. Relax your body, relax your mind. Remind yourself there's nothing else you have to think of. Place your mindfulness on the breathing in front. So actually you could say place your awareness or alertness on that, but we say mindfulness because you're trying to keep it in mind, the respiration. Once you've recognized it, then just to hold that recognition of the breathing to the exclusion of everything else. Then let go of your attention, your mindfulness to the breathing, and instead look at the nature of your mental consciousness. First of all, just noticing the mental consciousness, what's in it. Trying to see the spaciousness between the thoughts. Its nature as being clear and knowing. Let go of the sense of the body. That's just an appearance to your mind within the clarity of your mind. If you notice the sense of yourself being an observer, observing the mind, let go of that sense of the yourself as an observer. That's just an appearance to the mind. Just merge your awareness into the clear light nature of your mind. The nature of the mind is not stained permanently by afflictions, thoughts, delusions. It doesn't obstruct their leaving, or it doesn't obstruct virtuous minds from being created. Recognizing that develops a joy. I have the ability to develop all of the great qualities of the enlightened state. I have the nature, the ability to eliminate all my faulty ways of thinking, perceiving. This excellent opportunity is due to having a life of leisure and endowment, being born as a human when the Buddhist teachings are still existing and so forth, the 18 factors. Which I have right now due to karma I've created in past lives. With great effort often. This life is perishable, it's decaying with every short instant. So recognizing that I can use this life to benefit myself and others in the most profound way by making realizations, achieving liberation, achieving enlightenment, thinking not to waste this opportunity. I'm going to participate this morning in order to achieve that end goal of achieving enlightenment for the sake of all sentient beings. By listening to the discussion about awareness and knowing, which is essential to this program of achieving enlightenment. We have to know our mind. We have to know the laboratory of the mind. So out of a empathy, compassion for all mother sentient beings who have been intimately related with me in the past and will in the future, who have been kind not only as mothers, but even when they were strangers and enemies, recognizing our equality with them, wanting to fundamentally be free of suffering and to have happiness. Develop the motivation. I'm going to listen to the discussion this morning, participate in order to become a Buddha, from which state I can effortlessly, spontaneously, and without any error at all, lead sentient beings most quickly out of cyclic existence into that very same state of enlightenment. And then bringing your attention back to the present. And good morning, all. Good morning, Yarpel and Karen and David and Rowena joined us. So any questions? Anyone have a leftover question from last class? Seems like we had a few more people before. Maybe they're listening on.
Venerable, Charmaine's mother had to have surgery, emergency surgery, so she had to leave to go to LA. And so Matt is giving her a ride, etc. So that's why they're not here.
Oh, gosh. Okay. Sad news. Okay. At any rate, we're going to continue on our journey here in investigating the subject of Logic. Lo means awareness. As I mentioned last time, in Sanskrit, that's the word buddhi. I'd mentioned mati. Actually, in the dictionaries, you can see that the Tibetan word lo, which we're translating as awareness, means both, in Sanskrit is equivalent to both buddhi and mati. Like the name, maybe you know the ordained name of Lama Tsongkhapa. Does anyone know? Shankar, do you know? Or Yarpel, you know? It's Lama Tsongkhapa's ordained name.
Losang Drakpa.
Losang Drakpa. So in Sanskrit, that's Sumati Kirti. Kirti means Drakpa, renowned. Sumati means Losang. So Lo is also equivalent to Mati. That's what I was thinking last time. So and Rik is knowing. So or cognizing here, awareness and knowing, awareness and cognizing. This is the subject we're talking about. So we talked about objects in some detail. There's a little bit of confusion apparently on the bottom of page 7 of the root of the text by Purbachok about the horns of a rabbit. Have people come to grips with that? What I'm talking about? On the bottom of page 7, it says, whatever is the object of the mode of apprehension of the thought consciousness apprehending it is not necessarily an object of the mode of apprehension of thought. Sounds kind of weird, right? Anyone come to grips with that and could explain it? Okay, Stephen.
Well, I'd like to give a try if you don't mind, George, and just cut me off if I'm like way out of the ballpark. So when we talk about the horns of the rabbit, that's the determined object of the conceptual consciousness. Even though it's a non-existent, we can still think about it. Engaged object, it doesn't exist though, so it's an erroneous engaged object.
Well, the engaged object of a conceptual consciousness and its object of the mode of apprehension are synonymous.
Mm-hmm. I'm just using the terminology determined and engaged because...
Okay, and the determined object and the engaged object of a conceptual consciousness are synonymous. So let's say the conceptual consciousness, the appearing object is your mental image of what you're thinking about. The determined object, or you could say the conceived object, it's a thing you're thinking about. And that is the thing you're thinking about is the engaged object also.
Right.
So you said the determined object is the horns of a rabbit.
The engaged
but
object.
The engaged object doesn't exist.
Is the horns of a rabbit.
They're synonymous, the determined object and the engaged object.
Yeah. Okay. And so when we say selfless, so lacking an intrinsic self, but okay, it gets a little bit complicated here because so Tantrika doesn't posit a selfless of phenomena, but as you said last week, they do posit an object or a phenomena being empty of being possessed or being owned or an object of use of a self of persons. So in that sense, there's a lack of self of phenomena.
Right. So that's good. That's going to the end of that. So let's go just back to this thing about this. It seems like a contradictory statement. Whatever is the object of the mode of apprehension of the thought consciousness apprehending it. So for instance, a thought consciousness apprehending the horns of a rabbit. Okay. Is that possible? Can you have a thought consciousness apprehending the horns of a rabbit?
Oh, yeah.
Anyone think you can't? Well, horns of a rabbit don't exist. Well, you can still think that they exist. You can still think about them, right? You have a thought consciousness apprehending that. So it says, whatever is the object of the mode of apprehension of the thought consciousness apprehending it is not necessarily the object of the mode of apprehension of thought. So that's talking about in general. If you have, when you just talk about in general, in this, in Perbichok's system here, and all of the different monastic colleges has slightly different ways of explaining the same thing. So in his system, and was used at Sarajay and so forth, when you talk about a thought consciousness in general, without saying the thought consciousness apprehending the horns of a rabbit, here we say, whatever is the object of the mode of apprehension of a thought consciousness apprehending it, meaning, say, for example, the thought consciousness apprehending the horns of a rabbit is not necessarily the object of the mode of apprehension of thought. So that's implying that although a particular thought that's thinking about the horns of a rabbit, its object of the mode of apprehension or its determined object or engaged object, they're all synonymous, is the horns of a rabbit. In general, the horns of a rabbit are not the mode of apprehension of thought because the horns of a rabbit do not exist. A little bit, yeah, Bob.
Yeah, I mean, I think the problem is one has technical language that's being used here. You know, and I think what's so confusing to us is the mode of apprehension of the thought consciousness sounds almost identical to the object of the mode of the apprehension of thought. So what is the difference that of adding that word consciousness, you've actually somehow changed technical terms.
No, the thing that's added is the thought consciousness apprehending it. That's the crucial part.
Whatever, it's the apprehending it.
Right. So there is a consciousness, a thought consciousness, apprehending the horns of a rabbit, apprehending it. Okay.
Yeah.
So that you can have, and in that case, you posit its determined object and its engaged object, and its object of the mode of apprehension as the horns of a rabbit. But because the horns of a rabbit don't exist, those are just imputed, engaged object and determined object. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, another thing that's confusing. I mean, part of the problem is this language sort of all ends up on top of each other. Because as I understand it, the apprehended object of the conceptual consciousness is not the engaged object, but it's actually the appearing object.
Yeah, the apprehended object. But
here we're talking about apprehending it. And so when I look at apprehending it, I think, oh, well, if it's a mental conceptual consciousness apprehending something, it must be apprehending its image, not the real object.
No, that's not the case. So I don't have the Tibetan. I didn't print out the Tibetan, so I'll have it next time. So or do I? No, I don't have.
Yeah, I think it would be helpful to know. I mean, in the Tibetan, there must be two different. I mean, this must refer to two technically different things. So if I talk about things in terms of, determined object or engaged object or apprehended object or so forth, what is the difference between each of these terms?
So here, when we're talking about apprehended object, that shouldn't be conflated with apprehending.
Okay.
We're talking about something. Apprehending here means knowing it, or having a thought about it. Whatever is the object of the mode of apprehension. Essentially, we previously said the object of the mode of apprehension of a thought consciousness is the object you're thinking about, the conceived object or determined object. I'm using two different terms here for for determined object. It's the object you're conceiving, you're thinking about. It is also the engaged object, that which you're getting at. But since you can't really get at the horns of a rabbit, you can, it's just imputed determined object. The horns of a rabbit are the imputed determined object or conceived object and so forth. So here, in some of the other debates also, a lot of it has to do with some of it has to do with terminology, using the terminology in the right way, which can be frustrating because you sometimes can have the right idea, but can't express it necessarily in the terminology that the system is using. Here, it also has to do with different scholastic schools, like at Sarah May, which is right next to Sarah J Monastery. There are two different monasteries, or at Drebung or at Ganden, and they have sub schools within them. They all have they can have slightly different ways of talking about it. Like, say, for instance, when we talk about bodhicitta in the mind of a person, just to give an example, bodhicitta sometimes is said to exist continuously once you've developed it, once you have spontaneous bodhicitta. Other times it's said that it is not manifest at certain times. Say, for instance, when you're in meditative equipoise on emptiness, different schools would say different things. When you have a meditative equipoise on emptiness, you're realizing emptiness and no other conceptual thoughts are arising. Some schools would say bodhicitta still exists at that time, but they have to give some explanation how it exists. It exists in a subdued form. Other schools would say it doesn't exist at that time because it's not manifest. So there are different ways of understanding the same thing. both of those people, when they, those different schools or different ideas, when they get down to the nitty gritty, they would say the same thing. It's not manifest at that time. The bodhicitta is not manifest at that time, but it's still existing as an imprint in the mind, so that it's, in that sense, it's still existing. So here, when we talk about the thought conscious apprehending, let's say, thinking about the horns of a rabbit, the main idea is that you can have a thought consciousness thinking about the horns of a rabbit, but in general, because the horns of a rabbit do not exist, you can't really say that the determined object of that thought consciousness exists, or its engaged object, or its object of the mode of apprehension. You can't say that they exist. That's the main understanding there. Yeah,
Just to clarify one last small point, just a technical point. When we talk about the determined object of a conceptual consciousness, is it allowed in this system for that determined object to be considered to be imaginary, like the horns of a rabbit? Or, you know, because, or would you have to say that if you're thinking about the horns of a rabbit, it can only be an appearing object because the horns of a rabbit don't really exist, so that the engaged object doesn't exist. So is it permitted for the determined object of a conceptual consciousness to be an imaginary object like the horns of a rabbit? Or can the determined object, or does the determined object have to be something that's a real object?
The determined object of a thought consciousness thinking about the horns of a rabbit, you can posit it as the horns of a rabbit. But that, because the horns of a rabbit don't exist, you're positing something which is non-existent. And generally, if you talk about in general, when you don't talk about a thought consciousness apprehending the horns of a rabbit, in general, the determined object, conceived object, object of mode of apprehension and so forth, you're assuming they exist. Okay, so let's go on. We're going to skip the pages that have the little squares about them. And just to remind you, remember, I mentioned this terminology. What is it? You know, first of all, before a subject is brought up in our own tradition, we talk about the wrong views of the other traditions. We try to dispel those. And then we present our own tradition. And then once we presented our own position, wrong Luke, then other people might say, oh, you know, you Galupas are wrong, or you Sarah J, you're wrong because of this. And then we dispel those wrong views. So sometimes there's these squared, these sections that have boxes around them, sometimes before the wrong Luke and sometimes after the wrong Luke of those parts. So now we introduced last time about object possessors, because previously we talked about objects. There's different kinds of objects. Now objects possessors, or in other words, subjects, they're, Christine, they're synonymous, right? Object possessor means, it's just another word for subjects, object possessors. Here we talk about the definitions and the divisions of the object possessors, of the subjects. So the definition of something being a subject, or in other words, the definition of something being an object possessor is a thing that possesses its respective object. What can we say about that right off the start? It's a thing, so that means what? If something is a thing,
It's
Nadine,
existent, right?
can't hear you.
It's impermanent.
It's existent.
Nadine, can't hear you. Your voice
right.
is.
It's impermanent.
It has to be impermanent, right?
Yeah,
Things or functioning things are impermanent. The word ngobo that's translated here is thing. Sometimes in other texts is translated as functioning thing. So, to lead, you know, to make it more clear that you're not talking about non-functioning things like space. You wouldn't say that space is a thing. You know, non-compounded space is a thing. You wouldn't say that because it's not impermanent. So the definition of a subject is a thing, something that's impermanent, that possesses its respective object. Well, this may be useful to know because objects can be permanent, right? Objects, not all objects are impermanent, but the subjects of those have to be impermanent because they're consciousnesses or persons or expressive sounds. Those are the three divisions here we talked about last time. So persons, awarenesses, and expressive sounds. Persons are subjects. The definition of being a person is a being imputed in dependence upon any of its five aggregates, or as I said last time, maybe more precisely, the appropriate number of five aggregates. Bob, you have an ongoing question, or is that left over from?
I have a question about this.
Yeah.
So the question of this is, my understanding is the definition of an object in this context is that an object has to be the object of an awareness. And an expressive sound to me does not sound like an awareness. Although in some sense, I guess it's considered sort of a knower of some sort, but it's a little bit odd.
Sounds are subjects, not objects, right? In this kind.
No, but we're saying in the definition that the object possessor possesses its object. So if something possesses an object, whatever it is that possesses an object must be an awareness.
No, persons also persons
about,
are not awarenesses, although they do have awareness, right?
Yeah.
Say, for instance, I mentioned last time when we talk about, say, the example of a logger, as opposed to a logger, to a woman, cutting down a tree. The person who is the agent of that action of cutting is the person, but also you can say the agent of the cutting is the axe or the saw. They're both doing the action. So here, when we talk about subjects, the consciousness is a subject, but also that which possesses the subject, like the person. Person here is like the logsman. The instrument, like the axe, is the consciousness. So they're both agents of being subject, right?
Yeah, but that was not my question, though.
Yeah,
the question was not the person; it was the expression sound.
Yeah, I was getting that. Expressive, just bringing that in. Expressive sounds, you could say articulate sounds. They possess an object. So when I say cat, it's possessing, in that sense, the object that we see with our eyes or we hear meowing. It has that object. It's own respective object. When I say cat, although I might be misspeaking or I might have slang in the household, I might call the dog a cat, but generally cat refers to and possesses that particular object. Its own respective objects.
I mean, my question was really, there's a distinction between English usage and technical usage, and the technical usage that we had earlier defined an object to be necessarily an object of an awareness in the technical sense that was used in Buddhism here. And is an expressive sound therefore considered to be sort of, since it was generated by an awareness or a consciousness, is it sort of indirectly an awareness that knows? Because in English, we have no problem saying that, an expression has a meaning, which we consider to be the object of that expression.
Right.
But I'm just trying to get the awareness back into it. And to me, it looks like it must be sort of an indirect path to get to that awareness.
Okay, so you're looking at the very first definition. The definition of an object is that which is known by an awareness. So So I don't see the contradiction here with.
Well, I mean, a sound is not an awareness.
No. I don't. Wait, Bob. So I don't see the contradiction here either, because if object is something that is known by an awareness, right? And here it says that a sound is an object possessor, right? No.
Articulate sound, yeah.
An articulate sound is an object possessor. An object possessor is a thing that possesses its respective object.
Yeah, let's leave it at that. You can discuss this in the discussion group. I don't think there's a basic contradiction here, but you know, maybe Bob can elucidate more into the discussion group. So when we talk about persons, Bob, you still have something you want to say? Okay. Go ahead, your hand up. So person, the definition of something being a person, or you could say the definition of a person is a being imputed independence upon any of its 5 aggregates. You wouldn't just say that which is dependent on any of its 5 aggregates. What would be wrong with that? Why does it have to say a being imputed?
God realms.
Pardon?
Beings in the God realms, in the formless realms.
Well, here, they're beings, right?
Yeah, but they'd have no form.
Right, yeah, but we could say a being imputed on the appropriate number of its 5 aggregates.
Yeah.
Why do you have to have the statement, a being imputed? A being is synonymous with person, right? So you're essentially, you're saying a person is a person imputed upon the 5 aggregates. If you just said that which is imputed upon the 5 aggregates, there might be some kind of unclarity. So it's referring to something which is also sentient. Self, I, person, and being, although it doesn't state it here, are synonymous. They're referring to the same thing. Self, I, person. An illustration of a being who possesses a basis. An illustration of a person is a being who possesses the basis of one of the 3 realms. Remember we talked about that last time? What is the basis of a basis of the 3 realms? It's referring to having the appropriate number of aggregates in that realm. In the desire realm where we are, it means having a form aggregate, a body of some kind, feeling, discrimination, compositional factors, and consciousness aggregate. That's of the desire realm. There are also those 5 aggregates of the form realm, but the basis there is different. The physical basis is different. It's not like a gross body that we have, it's a more subtle body. And their consciousness aggregates of those 4 that are on the knowing side, awareness side, consciousness, discrimination, feeling, and compositional factors, they are also of a different character than those aggregates in the desire realm. Do you know that? So in the form realm, you have different feelings, you have different kind of awareness. That's why we try to develop single-pointed concentration. If you develop shamatha, single-pointed concentration, and when you actually achieve that, you have a mind that is ready to enter into the state of the form realm. If you apply at that point a kind of analysis we call vipassana, you can achieve a mind of the first form realm. And it's different at that point. At that point, you still have the bodily basis of the desire realm, but your mind is of the basis of the form realm. If you achieve that first concentration in meditation, you create the karma to be born in the form realm in the future, at which case you would also have the physical basis of the form realm, and you'd have the mental basis of the form realm. So it says, an illustration of a person is a being who possesses a basis of one of the three realms. Okay, so then the second kind of subject here are awarenesses. So awarenesses have their objects. They have appearing objects or determined objects or objects of engagement and so forth when we talked about the objects. The definition of an awareness is a knower. So awareness in Tibetan lo is synonymous with knower. It's actually given as its definition here. The definition of a consciousness, however, is that which is clear and knowing. So it adds a little more dimension to this. Consciousness is that which is clear and knowing. And I've mentioned that in our, our initial motivation meditations many times. In one sense, the definition of a knower, that which is clear and knowing, you can say knowing is its function and clarity is its nature. Like say, for instance, does anyone know the definition in Buddhism, say in the Abhidharma, of the earth element? Stephen, do you know the definition of the earth element? Yarpal, have you heard? No? Shanga? No? So generally it has two things. It has its nature and its function. Say earth element is that which is hard and supporting. Water element is that which is moist and cohesive and so forth. So generally some definitions have two parts, not all, but some definitions have two parts, one indicating the nature of the subject, the thing you're defining, and the other talking about its function. So here, that which is clear and knowing is kind of in that, when you have that kind of definition, clarity is referring to its nature, knowing is its function. So when we meditate on the clear light nature of the mind, sometimes we're meditating on just that nature. Sometimes you get, even though we say meditating on the clear light nature, sometimes you recognize I'm knowing this. You're recognizing the fact that it is a cognizer. Shankar.
Yes, so my question is, so awareness is a knower and consciousness has clarity and the knowingness, right?
Right.
It seems like consciousness is a subset. It almost seems like consciousness is a subset of an awareness, right? Because it's synonymous, right?
They're synonymous. It's not a subset, but it's just defining it in a more precise way. It's talking about not only its cognizing, its function. It's sometimes you can just define something by its function because there is nothing else other than awareness, knower, or consciousness that is aware of things, that knows things. They all know things. That's sufficient to say that. When you add its nature, that brings in another dimension to make things more precise. It's not sufficient to say that consciousness is clear, that which is clear, leaving off the knowing, because there are other things that are clear that you could use the word clear for, like a crystal or something like that. Although the clarity that's being excuse me, the clarity that's being referred to here is not the same clarity of a crystal or a pane of glass or something like that. Still, there can be that ambiguity. So the definition of consciousness is that which is clear in knowing. And then it says awareness, lo, which we said buddhi in Sanskrit, knower, rikpa, and consciousness, shepa, are synonymous. Then we immediately got into the divisions, valid cognizers and non-valid cognizers. So here, I'd like to remind you of this analogy I've given several times of a pizza. You know, you can cut the pizza and into triangular, this curved edge on the bottom, kind of triangular pieces, right? Generally how you think of it. Or you can cut it into squares. Oh, there you go. Or you can cut it some other way. You know, you can cut it in concentric circles or something. So in the same way, when you say divisions, you can divide awareness in many different ways. Here, the initial division of awareness into valid cognizers and non-valid cognizers, or here the way they're translating it, non-valid awarenesses, that's arbitrary. You could divide it into other ways also, as we will see. This is a little bit challenging because we're immediately getting into the most precise kind of way of dividing awarenesses. Those that get at their objects, that know them unambiguously. Those are what's called valid cognizers here. Or as a note earlier in the text said, originally when Elizabeth Nappers translated this, she used the term prime cognizers. Here it said, where she said prime cognizers, we've changed it throughout the text to valid cognizers. There's a reason for both. Here, valid cognizers or prime cognizers are things that know their objects unambiguously, get at them without any superimpositions. Non-valid cognizers or non-valid awarenesses are those things, those consciousnesses that have some kind of fault in that don't get at their object perfectly. So here we'll get into the definitions. So valid cognizers. So we're going to skip this little section with a square around it on 11 and the square section on 12 down to the bottom of 12 where it says in our own system. So this is the wrong look. Wrong means oneself or self. Luke means tradition or system. You could say our own system, our own tradition. The definition of a valid cognizer or pramana is a new incontrovertible knower. So those of you who studied the tenets class will be familiar with this. Was there anyone here who anyone who's seen that definition for the first time? A new incontrovertible, okay, Amanda. So here in this tradition, in the Sautrantika, because this text is written from the Sautrantika system of tenets. That's something I mentioned before, but is worth knowing because most of the schools of Buddhism, other than the Vaibhashika and the Prasangika, Vaibhashika doesn't even have necessarily a definition of valid cognizer, but the Prasangika doesn't say that it has to be a new incontrovertible knower. They would say it is sufficient to be an incontrovertible knower. What does incontrovertible mean here? That means you can't controvert it with some other evidence. You know, it's incontrovertible. It means it's exactly that way. A new incontrovertible knower. In Tibetan, it's milua. And so there were three things we were talking about at the beginning of the class: wrong consciousness, a mistaken consciousness, and an incontrovertible consciousness. Wrong consciousness means, you know, it's just wrong. You know, like thinking that there's a self of persons, or thinking that there's the horns of a rabbit. There are other examples, of course. Mistaken consciousness is something that's mistaken with respect to its appearing object. So even a thought consciousness that knows something correctly, even realizes it correctly, is still mistaken because it's mistaken with respect to its appearing object, the mental image. It can be incontrovertible because it can get at its engaged object and know its engaged object.
Cool.
Oh, someone thought that was cool. So a new incontrovertible knower in the Sautrantika system and most of the other systems, it has to be a fresh or new knower. So the first instant, say for instance, if I'm looking at a tree and I see the tree, the first instant of a train of visual consciousness, when I say a train, that means there'll be, you open your eye and you look at it for some period of time, whether it be a few thought instants or a few consciousness instants or, a couple of seconds, you look at something, the first instant of that train is fresh or new. And it has a certain, according to the Sautrantika system here, it has a certain more valid nature because it's knowing the thing by its own power. The subsequent instance of recognizing that tree or that color or whatever are like the cars after the engine of a train. Like the first instant is like the engine. It's what's propelling the train, all the rest of the cars. They're not going by their own power, so they lack this sense of being new or, getting at the object by their own power. So according to our system here, and our system here means the Sautrantika system, as Gelugpa is explaining it, a new incontrovertible knower. So then it says, there's a necessity for expressing the three statements, new, incontrovertible, and knower. Well, you can say need, I'm not sure. You don't necessarily have to say need, but anyway, there is a reason for expressing the three, new, incontrovertible, and knower, as parts of the definition of a valid cognizer, because new eliminates that subsequent cognizers are valid cognizers. That's clear, right? Subsequent cognizer means something which is knowing something which was known before. It's like the second instant, like the trains, the cars of the train after the engine being like the prime cognizer or the valid cognizer. New eliminates the subsequent cognizers are valid cognizers. In this system, they are not. Those of you who study tenets remember in the Prasangika system, you could still have subsequent cognizers, could still be valid cognizers or prime cognizers because they're incontrovertible. They don't have to be new. But here in this system, they have to be new. Incontrovertible eliminates that correctly assuming consciousnesses are valid cognizers. So what's a correctly assuming consciousness? It's a consciousness which is an assumption, but it's a correct assumption, or you could say presumption, like saying right now that in our minds, if you believe, well, we could say correct assumption here, you could say correct belief. If you believe that there are past and future lives, anyone believe that there are past and future lives? Is there anyone? Yarpul, do you believe that there are past and future lives?
Yes.
Okay, you didn't raise your hand.
I didn't hear the question.
Oh yeah. So is that a valid cognizer? Your consciousness that's believing in past and future lives? You might say, well, yeah, past and future lifetimes exist, Buddha said, Lama Zopa said, Dalai Lama says, not everyone says, but they do exist. Therefore, it's a realization. No, it's not a realization because you have not eliminated all of the misconceptions in your mind. You haven't realized the existence of past and future lives. That's called a correct belief. It's a correct belief is not incontrovertible. Incontrovertible here doesn't mean that you can't give evidence that it doesn't exist. It means that it's actually eliminated all of the misconceptions about something and it's gotten at the object. So that's that which is new, incontrovertible, and knower. The word knower eliminates that physical sense powers are valid cognizers. What is that talking about? I think those of you who studied tenets may know. Anyone remember? Nadine, you have a thing?
Ashikas assume that physical sense powers can be valid cognizers, maybe?
They can be, they believe that they can be both knowers and valid cognizers. So what Nadine said was that Vaibhashika, the first of the four main philosophical schools, they say that the sense base, the faculty, like say that in our terminology, the rods and cones at the back of the retina, or maybe not the back of the retina, in the retina, the back of the eye, that they themselves also know the object, and that they can validly know that object. All of the other schools say, no, physical form, which is like, so the eye faculty is a kind of subtle physical form, even more subtle than the rods and cones. Perhaps that subtle eye faculty exists within the rods and cones, but it is not the rods and cones themselves. It's something more subtle. Physical matter, even whatever its subtlety, cannot know. It is of a different category than consciousness. When we talk about impermanent things, we talk about form, consciousness, and non-associated compositional factors, which are neither form nor consciousness. So form is of a different category than consciousness. You can't create consciousness out of form. You can't create form out of consciousness. One can't just transform into the other. So this is supposedly there by necessity, it says, in the way it's translated here, to eliminate that physical sense powers are valid cognizers. It's not necessary. You could just say new and incontrovertible. But this is actually added to eliminate that qualm in some people's minds that maybe the physical sense powers are valid cognizers. We're on the same wavelength here? Christine, how are you doing? So when valid cognizers are divided, there are two kinds of valid cognizers, two kinds of prime cognition. Direct valid cognizers and inferential valid cognizers. Or in other words, there are two ways that we can know something incontrovertibly. Another way of saying it is there are two ways that we can realize something, because realization here in Buddhism means realization means incontrovertible, getting to the core of something, knowing it unambiguously. According to these tenets, even the subsequent cognizers can realize, but they're not new, according to Sautrantika, so they're not valid cognizers, but they still realize their object. So there are two ways that we can realize things, directly or inferentially. The reason is say, you might say, why doesn't it say directly and conceptually? Because usually there's two kinds of consciousness, right? conceptual consciousness, and direct consciousness, direct perceiver. Bob, why doesn't it just say direct valid cognizers and conceptual valid cognizers?
Well, it's because you can let's see, hang on. I mean, you don't need a direct perceiver directly realizes it. It doesn't need any concepts. And usually,
I'm saying, why does it, in this twofold division of valid cognizers, why does it say direct valid cognizer that we can agree on?
Yeah.
Why doesn't it say for the second one, conceptual valid cognizers? Here it says inferential valid cognizers.
Yeah, because conceptual cognizers in general aren't incontrovertible.
No, it says inferential valid cognizers. Why can't you say conceptual valid cognizers?
Oh, conceptual valid cognizers.
Talk about awareness as being either direct or conceptual.
Well, it's because
okay. Anyone have Stephen? Do you have a thought? You look like you're itching there.
Well, I was just thinking that I have in the past, am now, and in the future will have conceptions, and I will be wrong about them.
Right, but
that's different from
then they are not. But then they are not valid cognizers. What if I said conceptual valid cognizers instead of inferential valid cognizers?
Well, inferential, that implies the process of inferring, and so using a sign in order to infer something and then coming to an incontrovertible conclusion about it, where conceptual, to me, doesn't imply that.
Right, but if I said conceptual valid cognizers.
Oh, well, okay, so that would
Christine
eliminate direct valid cognizers then.
Yeah, valid. Christine, you have a thought.
Would it be because it hasn't, the conceptual valid hasn't eliminated everything else?
No.
No.
In fact, inferential valid cognizers are conceptual valid cognizers. They're conceptual.
Right.
They're valid. So here, when we say this, is because it's to indicate that subset of conceptions. It's the actual the way that you're conceptually validly understanding something, realizing it conceptually. The only way that you can do it is through a process of reasoning with a logical sign and so forth. So through the process of inference. It does happen to be a conceptual consciousness, but it's just, it's affirming that it has to be through a conceptual consciousness through the vehicle of logic. And Chaka, you have a...
So that's eliminating getting at something because someone tells it, like the Dalai Lama says something or like that or whatever, right? Because it's not, that's not an inferential cognition. Is that correct?
They can be. There are different kinds of inferential cognition. For instance, by the
But I mean, if I have a doubt tending towards fact, for example, or something like that, right? I mean,
that's not an inferential cognizer.
Right. So that's what I was thinking, is that would...
And it's not a conceptual valid cognizer because it's not a valid cognizer.
Oh, right.
Cognizer,
that's right.
So there's no contradiction between the two. So in inferential cognizers, there are some that are called due to the power of the fact, which is the usual kind of logic. Some generally, you could say there are two categories: those that are due to reliance upon a valid person. For instance, even though you don't realize something either directly or conceptually by your own power, by ascertaining that a certain person like the Buddha or the Dalai Lama is a valid person who is, their statements are trustworthy, you can realize through inference something that they said, if you accept that. Okay, so Bob, yeah, you have a question.
So just to summarize, I mean, if they had used the word conceptual, it would not be wrong, because when you use the word conceptual together with valid cognizer, the only type of conceptual valid cognizer that exists is an inferential valid cognizer. So it's just being extra clear, adding the word inferential to be extra clear.
Well, yeah, and also because in the literature on valid cognition or prima cognition, which is called pramana, maybe you've heard the text like pramana vartika and pramana samuchaya and so forth, different texts on valid cognition or prime cognition. They're Dignaga and Dharmakirti, the main authors that we rely on. When they talk about valid cognition, they use these, they say there's direct valid cognition and inferential valid cognition. They don't say conceptual valid cognition. That's the main reason it's used there. So Amanda, you've got your yellow hand up.
Is it like, so a direct valid cognizer is kind of like those people, you give them a really complicated math program, a math question, and they get it. And then inferential valid cognizers are the ones that have to get the paper and the pencil out and figure it out that way.
Interesting, right? Yeah. You think about it for a while.Maybe there's some doubt about that. So generally, a direct valid cognizer, say even with the mind, if you're talking about, you're not talking about the senses. You're just talking about the mental consciousness, right? So first of all, to understand certain phenomena directly with the mind is very rare to have direct valid cognizers. Well, you could say there's a lot of them. It's said that a common example of a mental direct cognition is, say for instance, you see something with your eyes. I see the trees outside my window. The first instant of thinking about that, I've seen it with my eyes, and they are kind of like just the receptor, like the like the monitors in the basement of all of the different surveillance cameras around the center, right, or the parking lot. The person in the basement who's looking at the cameras is like the mental consciousness. It can know what the eyes are seeing, what the ears are hearing, and so forth. But the first instant of, so there is one instant of mental direct perception of the input from the eyes and so forth. Okay, but generally, when we talk about mental direct perception, the main thing is talking about when you can develop a mental direct perception of subtle impermanence, or of the selflessness of persons, or the selflessness of phenomena, or you could say the emptiness of phenomena. It is possible to have a direct mental perception of those, but it always has to depend upon having first had a conceptual understanding of that. You have to have, to realize it conceptually, you have to use inference. You have to have an inferential valid cognizer. Then through the process of familiarizing yourself with that over time, the mental image becomes more and more transparent, is not as opaque, and is the only thing that's appearing. And finally, upon great familiarity with that, the mental image becomes totally transparent, and you have a direct realization with a mental consciousness. So the example that you gave, are you a mathematician, Amanda? Maybe you admire, like Einstein supposedly, you pose a problem and he sort of just get an intuition of it and then work back conceptually to explain it to other people or something like that. Maybe that's what you're thinking about. Bob, you've heard of stories like that too, right? So here it's not so much like that a direct valid cognizer is like the person who just knows the answer. From a Buddhist perspective, you would, it's not just a matter of intuition or something popping into your mind. You have to go through a process of realizing it inferentially and then having a direct perception of it, a direct mental perception of it. Christine.
So here's my thinking and here's my question. We posit that all phenomena seen through the sense, all sensory phenomena are impermanent.
Mm-hmm.
So we can only have that initial new direct perception, true direct perception of that. I mean, it can only be valid if it's that one instance, that new instance, because it's not the same after that, it's changing.
Well, you could use that, but generally it's not just that it's changing. Usually the system that says you need to have the word new is because only the first instant is getting at the object by its own power.
Oh, it comes
the subsequent instance are kind of like riding along, being pulled along by the engine, you know. They still realize the object, but they're not getting at it by their own power.
The object has changed. It's not the same as it was when I had that new direct perception, because if it's impermanent, it's changing subtly every moment.
Right. Well, then you'd have to say the subsequent instance also are knowing that subsequent, that subsequent transformation of the object. So that's not the reason.
The other question is, when there is a direct perception of something permanent, like uncompounded space, that's not changing. I mean, when not a direct, when there's a valid cognition of space,
right,
unchanging, that's different because it's not changing like impermanent phenomena. So are they different?
That's true. Space, uncompounded space is not changing. Also, emptiness is not changing. Is that right?
Right.
What about the emptiness of my water mug here?
Well, that's permanent because when the mug goes away, it will go away, but it's not changing.
Right. Okay. So it's said to be the emptiness of this mug, even though the mug is impermanent, the emptiness of it is said to be permanent.
Right.
Okay. So let's leave that for a second. Let's go on a little bit further. When valid cognizers are divided, there are two: direct valid cognizers and inferential valid cognizers. Okay. So it means things that you know conceptually, validly. The individual definitions, illustrations, and so forth will be explained later. So this is a little bit anticlimactic because I said you could divide up the pizza in different ways. Generally, we start with one of the divisions is in direct perceivers and in the other divisions. So here it says direct perceivers. Why is it saying direct perceivers? Because we said there are direct valid cognizers and inferential valid cognizers. Now it's going to explain what a direct perceiver is, the direct part.
Because a direct perceiver by definition has to be a valid cognizer, right?
No. The direct perceivers don't have to be valid. You're thinking they have to be valid? So we say direct valid cognition, direct valid cognizer, direct, you're adding valid onto that. So for something to be direct, a direct perceiver, it doesn't necessarily have to be valid.
So valid means it's incontrovertible, right?
Right.
That's what we're saying. So can you have direct perception that is controvertible?
Yeah. If I look at a white snow mountain and it appears to be yellow,
so wrong consciousness. Yes. Okay.
We call that non-conceptual wrong consciousness. Yeah, Bob.
Yeah, I think here, right. The snow mountain that looks blue or something is not a direct perceiver. It's a non-conceptual consciousness, but it's not a direct perceiver because it's mistaken.
Right.
But I think here,
non-conceptual wrong consciousness. Yeah, right.
yeah, I mean, here they must be thinking about subsequent. You can have a direct perceiver, which is a subsequent consciousness, and that way it would satisfy the, it would still be unmistaken, but it would not be new, perhaps.
Right. Excuse me. You're right. You're right.
So that's why a direct perceiver is not necessarily valid, because it does not necessarily satisfy the criteria of newness.
There's a third kind of direct perceiver that, and you have to accept what Bob said is right, better explanation, but also there are direct perceivers to which an object appears, but the object is not ascertained. That means like an inattentive perception. I'm looking at a ballet, I'm fascinated by that, and my companion says, "Oh, look at the program. That then answers this." And although it appears to my ear consciousness, because my mind, my mental consciousness is mainly paying attention to what the eyes are seeing, it goes unattended. That's also called a direct perceiver, but that is not a valid cognizer. So Bob's explanation plus this are reasons to say why, it's not why not all direct perceivers are valid cognizers. So the definition of an awareness that is a direct perceiver, or you could just say the definition of a direct perceiver, is a knower that is free from conceptuality and non-mistaken. Okay, free from conceptuality and non-mistaken. So generally we would say direct perceivers, if you casually, you say they are consciousnesses that know their objects without conceptuality, without depending upon a mental image and so forth. Why does it say also non-mistaken? Because generally, conceptual consciousness is mistaken, right? Why is it mistaken? Because it mistakes its appearing object for the actual object. So you would think that a direct perceiver, if something is free from conceptuality, why is it not necessarily free from mistake then?
Could you repeat that again, please?
So conceptual consciousness is said to be mistaken, right? Why? Because it's mistaken with respect to its appearing object. Its appearing object is a mental image, maybe of your mother's face or Buddha or something, that appears to be your mother's face, but it is not your mother's face. So it is said to be mistaken. It's mistaken with respect to its appearing object. So here, if we said a knower that is free from conceptuality, because conceptual consciousnesses are mistaken, wouldn't that be also free from mistake already? Why do you have to add non-mistaken? Bob, you were nodding.
No, I was just agreeing with you.
Okay,
that in a certain sense, as soon as you say it has to be non-mistaken, you immediately eliminate all conceptuality.
Yeah, you eliminate.
But I think the reason you need unmistaken is that, again, you have these non-conceptual consciousnesses which are mistaken, like due to faulty sense powers and things.
Is that what you were going to say, Christine? Yeah. So that you'd raised your hand first, but Bob was already speaking. So, yeah, I think so. So a knower that is free from conceptuality and non-mistaken, because there are non-conceptual consciousnesses that are not called direct perceivers, like seeing the snow mountain as blue or yellow. Blue is the reason that your icon, it might appear blue apparently is because of the lesser amount of oxygen at high altitudes. Reason it might appear yellow is if you have jaundice and everything, even you look at a conch shell, which is actually white. It might have a sort of a yellow tint to it due to the jaundice. Stephen.
Oh, thank you, Venerable George. Just a terminology here. So we have mistaken and then erroneous or fallible. Why are we saying non-mistaken here instead of free from conceptuality and free from error, for example?
Well, error is a different thing. That's more with wrong consciousness. When we talk about wrong consciousness, mistaken consciousness, and infallible consciousness. Infallibility has to do with the fact that it has gotten at the object of engagement. It knows its object. Mistaken means mistaken with respect to its appearing object. So non-mistaken would mean that it is not mistaken with respect to its appearing object.
Okay, so in this
erroneous is another. Yeah, Bob.
In the example, the appearing object is blue snow.
Again, you could debate about that. Does blue snow exist? Usually they say there's more debates. So the engaged object is actually the appearing object, and the engaged object of that is actually white snow, but it is apprehended as blue. Anyway, you can read in some of the, we'll get to that later when we talk about non-conceptual mistaken consciousnesses. Yeah, Bob.
Yeah, so I mean, putting Stephen's question a different way, since mistaken and wrong has to do with whether you're talking about the appearing or the engaged object, you could say that for a sense consciousness, that the appearing and the engaged objects are identical. So
generally we say that for a sense consciousness, or we say for a direct perceiver, the engaged object and the appearing object are the same, are synonymous. For a sense consciousness, they don't necessarily have to be the same, because you can have a mistaken eye consciousness perceiving Snow Mountain as blue. Anyway, let's leave that.
Okay.
When we get to that, when we get to the non-conceptual mistaken consciousnesses, so we can go into more detail. So the definition of awareness that is a direct perceiver, the definition of a direct perceiver is a knower that is free from conceptuality and non-mistaken. When awarenesses that are direct perceivers, when direct perceivers are divided, there are four. Sense direct perceivers, mental direct perceivers, self-knowing direct perceivers, and yogic direct perceivers. So those of you who studied tenets with the Prasangika highest philosophical school accept all four? Stephen, you're okay.
Along with the Vaibhashika,
quicker than Bob did.
Along with the Vaibhashika, Venerable George, Prasangika do not accept self-knowers or self-perceivers.
Right. So they would generally say there are three kinds of direct perceivers: sense direct perceivers, mental direct perceivers, yogic direct perceivers. And in a sense, yogic direct perceivers are mental direct perceivers, but they have a particular basis, which we'll go into in more detail later. So sense direct perceivers. So your eye, ears, nose, taste, and tactile are the senses, 5 senses. Each of them, the knowers, the awarenesses of those, the eye awareness, the eye consciousness, the ear consciousness, nose consciousness, taste consciousness, tactile consciousness, all know their objects in a direct way, can know them in a direct way as direct perceivers. Mental direct perceivers, most mental perceivers are conceptual, but there are these exceptions that can know things directly once you've realized it through inference, or even you can have a direct mental perceiver of another person's consciousness, clairvoyance that knows another person's consciousness. If I know what Christine's thinking right now, I have no idea what she's thinking. But if I were, that would be called a mental direct perceiver. But generally, it is possible to have a direct perceiver with mental consciousness. And you can, especially for the upper schools, Mahayana schools, you can have a direct perceiver of emptiness, for instance. Self-knowing direct perceivers means, I think there's some people here who didn't study tenets, maybe haven't heard that term before. Amanda, do you know what a self-knower is? So a self-knowing or self-knower, generally most consciousnesses are called other knowers. It's kind of like in the sense of subject and object. Subject I, consciousness, and its respective objects, knows its respective objects, shapes and colors, right? Subject and object. So it's an other knower. It knows something other than itself. According to the Sautrantika, Chittamatra, and some of the Svatantrika schools, there is a faculty within any consciousness that isn't an other knower. It's a self-knower. It's not pointed outward toward its respective object. Its respective object is its own nature. When we're doing our meditation at the beginning, are we trying to meditate on a self-knower, knowing the nature of the mind? Well, it doesn't fit the definition of what self-knower means here. What we're actually doing is one instant of consciousness is remembering a previous moment of consciousness, investigating its nature, having developed an inference about it or something. So it's not called a self-knower. Just introspection is not called self-knowing. Self-knowing is a consciousness which is not another knower. Other knowers are things that know phenomena other than their own nature, okay? And then yogic direct perceivers are consciousnesses that are based upon a union of tranquil abiding and penetrative insight. You know those terms? You know what? Anyone doesn't know what tranquil abiding and penetrative insight are? In Sanskrit, we say shamatha and vipassana. Shamatha, or tranquil abiding, is a consciousness that's reached single-pointed concentration on something, can remain on it indefinitely. Vipassana, or penetrative insight, is an extra faculty that you can develop in addition to that to analyze within that without losing the stability. Once you have a union of tranquil abiding and penetrative insight, you can develop deep insight into certain things like subtle impermanence or selflessness of persons. Those kinds of direct perceivers are called yogic direct perceivers. Okay, so how are we doing? We're just about, originally this was meant to be originally when we did tenets, we were doing 2 hours, and then Shanka said, it's a little too long, there's an hour and a half. Hour and a half now seems a little bit short, so I'm thinking we're going to compromise, maybe hour and 45 minutes. So we still got a couple of minutes left. Is that okay? Christine, you okay. Anyone want to put down?
One more.
What?
2 hours.
Someone says 2 hours. Okay, well, we'll see. Stephen, what do you think? Oh, that's just thumbs up for more. Okay.
Thumbs up for an hour 45. That's where my vote is.
Okay, so we'll compromise today, and then we'll see.
Well, it's partly so that we could, along with discussion session, it doesn't become like a 3 hour or 3.5 hour thing.
Right, but then the other thing is that this part is meant for 6 weeks, and with only an hour and a half, because we do prayers and dedication, we won't finish in 6 weeks. the first part, and then the second part, mental factors, be mine. Let me just let's.
Venerable, I hit the wrong button and I muted you instead of me. I'm sorry.
Oh, yeah, I didn't think I touched my screen in any way. That's interesting. Yeah, thanks for that observation. So thanks, Christine, for frantically. With respect to the first of these, that is direct perceivers, we have two parts, definitions and divisions. Definition of a sense direct perceiver. That which is produced in dependence upon its own uncommon empowering condition, a physical sense power. That's one part of the definition. Usually the definitions that start this way that have two parts, they say kang shik, that means, first of all, that which is produced in dependence upon its own dominant condition, or here it says uncommon empowering condition, and a physical sense power, and that which is a knower that is free from conceptuality and is non-mistaken. So that part's the same, right? A knower that is free from conceptuality and non-mistaken, that's the definition of a direct perceiver, right? So that's coming at the end. But within direct perceivers, those that are produced in dependence upon their own uncommon empowering condition or uncommon dominant condition, a physical sense power. So what does that mean? Generally, when we have the arisal of consciousness, there are three conditions that have to be present. Have you heard this before? Karen, have you heard three conditions? Yarpel, do you know the three conditions that have to be present?
Yes.
Oh, yeah. Okay, you're going to be really technical. Yes, then I have to. Okay.
Unmistaken. You have to have the object that's being perceived.
The object condition, the observed object condition.
The observed object condition. Then you have to have the sense power, as in the power of vision to be able to see the object.
So that's called what? That's called the empowering condition. In this case, uncommon, that means its own exclusive. So for instance, the ear consciousness can't see. Its uncommon empowering condition empowers it to hear sounds. So that's why the word uncommon is there. And then what's the third condition?
The third one is the previously, the moment of consciousness before that contact is made.
Right. That's called the immediate condition, immediately preceding condition or immediate condition. Say, for instance, what about the first instant of eye consciousness? That doesn't have an immediate preceding moment of eye consciousness, right? So I just in the morning open up for the first time. Where's the immediate condition for that?
That would be the immediate condition of just awareness of the consciousness itself, not particular to any sense consciousness.
Yeah, the immediate condition doesn't have to be of that same continuum. You can have an immediate condition of just having consciousness, mental consciousness. You're waking up, and then as a result of that, that acts as the immediate condition for the first instant of eye consciousness. So that which is produced in dependence upon its own uncommon empowering condition, a physical sense power. So this is just talking about sense direct perceivers, not eye direct perceivers, and is a knower that is free from conceptuality and non-mistaken. That's a mouthful, but it might be worth memorizing. Divisions. When sense direct perceivers are divided, there are three. Again, you can divide them different ways. Direct valid cognizers, subsequent valid cognizers, and inattentive valid cognizers. I'm just using different words here. So if you're reading the text, valid cognizers that are direct perceivers. You could just say direct, oh yeah, yes, you should say sense. Sense, direct perceiver, valid cognizers, subsequent valid cognizers that are direct perceivers, and awarenesses to which an object appears but is not ascertained that are direct perceivers. So they all have to be direct perceivers because they're divisions of direct perceivers. So they say that are sense direct perceivers. And so you could say there are, of those sense direct perceivers, there are those that are valid cognizers, those that are subsequent cognizers, the subsequent moments, and those that are consciousnesses to which an object appears but is not ascertained. What does that mean? That another way of saying is inattentive perception, like the example I gave of the ballet, or if you're more crude like me, you're watching the football game and your friends, your partner or wife or someone says, "Oh dear, can you turn around? I've got the nachos ready," or something like that. You're so engrossed in the game that, although the sound appeared to your ear, your mental consciousness was not paying sufficient attention to that subsequently you can recall what was said to you. You might have some vague recollection that some noise took place. Shankar, you've had your hand up for a while. Sorry.
Yeah, this is going back to the previous one about the definition of a sense perceiver. Regarding the first line, which has to have its uncommon, condition, empowering condition. So you said, you can't have an eye consciousness smelling things because it has to use its own sense power, right?
Right.
So how does it work? Like, how does it eliminate a Buddha's, eye consciousness because any of his consciousness can sense, can use any. Can his eye consciousness can smell, right? So
right, his finger consciousness can see and so forth. Yeah, it's physical consciousness can see. Yeah, so that which is produced in dependence upon its own uncommon empowering condition, a physical sense power, and a knower that is free from conceptuality and non-mistaken. So for a Buddha, a direct sense perceiver could be independent, could be developed in dependence upon other sense empowering conditions. So it wouldn't fit without some augmentation. Generally, wouldn't fit that
okay.
So divisions, we said valid of sense direct perceivers. Those that are valid. So that means that they're fresh and incontrovertible. Subsequent means they're incontrovertible but not fresh, the subsequent moments of something, once something has already been realized. And then when we're talking about, we're not talking about, here, subsequent cognizers, both valid and subsequent cognizers realize their objects, but awarenesses to which an object appears but is not ascertained, they don't realize their object. Right, so they're not either valid cognizers or subsequent cognizers. Okay, examples. The first, or an illustration of the first, is the first moment of a sense direct perceiver apprehending a form. So when we say form here, it means visual form, and the only visual forms that eyes are said to apprehend are shapes and colors. You can say that eye apprehends a person or a tree or something like that, but what you mean is the shape of that, or the configuration of that, or the color hue of that. So the first instant of that is a sense direct perceiver. Example of a sense direct perceiver apprehending form. The second is, what is the second? Subsequent cognizers that are sense direct perceivers. Second, the example of that is the second moment of a sense direct perceiver apprehending a form. Subsequent still realizing the form, shape, or color, but is not fresh. So it's called a subsequent cognizer. And the third, for example, the sense direct perceiver apprehending a form in the continuum of a person whose mind is especially attracted to a pleasant sound. So here it's opposite example that I gave, although both, can be used. Here you're listening to something, and a car crashes, and the police come by later and say, "Did you see the license plate?" Maybe you saw the license plate, or the car is fleeing from the bank robbery. This is the famous one, right? But you're engaged in a conversation with someone. Your mental consciousness is paying attention to your ear consciousness. And although the license plate appeared to your eye consciousness, it was not ascertained. What does it mean it was not ascertained? It means that you can't subsequently develop a memory of that. Now, in the case, you might say, oh, wait a second, with hypnosis, even though you said, I can't remember the license plate, later in hypnosis, they say, oh yeah, I see, that wasn't totally inattentive. You had your mind was kind of split. You saw that and you caught it for a second, but you can't remember it immediately. That wouldn't be a complete inattentive perception, or a consciousness to which an object appears but was not ascertained, because subsequently you can develop a remembering consciousness of that. But in general, if you can't remember something, you could say that's an inattentive perception. That's a colloquial term I'm using here, or a consciousness to which an object appeared but was not ascertained. Make sense? Amanda? You have a question?
Yes, I have a question. So can that be applied to me here at this moment?
You're inattentive.
So my mind, my mind is hearing what you're saying, but my ignorance or something, I don't know what the word would be, is distracting me. So consequently, I can't actually take in everything of what you're saying, and I can't remember it. Can what you just said be applied to me in this class right now?
When you're listening, that can be called a direct perceiver, right? So that you could say, the reason that you're not paying attention, or you're not able to ascertain what I'm saying, say, for instance, you might be, have doubt in your mind and say, but what does that mean? There can be some, you're not paying sufficient attention to this because you're not, the words are coming in an order that don't make sense to you. So your mind, your mental consciousness conceptually is ruminating about this. You're saying ignorance. It might be ignorance, might be just, doubt or something like that. So that could also be an example of a awareness to which an object appears. It means your ear consciousness to which a sound appears, but is not ascertained, in the sense that later you'd say, I can't say I can't repeat what he said. I can't even remember the words or something, because of your mind being occupied, your mental consciousness being occupied with something else, not paying sufficient attention to the ear consciousness. If you were to be able to recite the words back, but you didn't know what they meant, that would not be a consciousness to which an object appeared, but was not ascertained, because you ascertained the objects, the sounds, and so forth, the words. Okay, so when direct perceivers are divided in another way, remember I said the pizza can be divided in different ways, right? Sense direct perceivers apprehending forms, sense direct perceivers apprehending sounds, sense direct perceivers apprehending odors, tastes, and tangible objects, tactile objects. So what did we say before? Division, valid. So we divided sense direct perceivers into valid, subsequent, and inattentive, or you could just be the more sensible division is eye direct perceivers, ear direct perceivers, nose direct perceivers, tongue direct perceivers, tactile direct perceivers, or as is said here, sense direct perceivers apprehending forms. That means eye direct perceivers, sense direct perceivers, sense direct perceivers apprehending sounds. It's leaving off the word apprehending. That means ear direct perceivers, nose direct perceivers, tongue direct perceivers, and tactile object direct perceivers. You can write it in different ways. And I'll just give this one last definition. The definition of a sense direct perceiver apprehending form. So that doesn't mean form in general, because sounds are also forms. But when it says form in this case, it's talking about visual form, shapes and colors. So this is essentially talking about the sense direct perceiver, a visual direct perceiver. That which is generated in dependence upon its own uncommon empowering condition, the eye sense power. It's a subtle matter in the back of your eye. That's the, what did we call it? The dominant condition, right? Or the empowering condition. And its observed object condition, a form, a visual form, meaning shape or color. Here it doesn't mention the immediate condition, and is a knower that is free from conceptuality and is non-mistaken. Extend this format to the other sense powers. So that's one of your exercises for next time. Try to enunciate the definition of an ear direct perceiver, or a direct perceiver apprehending sounds, however you would like to say it, and so forth for the other ones. And also read the non-outlined sections of the pages for the next 3 or 4 pages. Any questions before we end? Probably lots of questions. Yeah, Nadine.
Expressive sounds are subjects, but why are not expressive signs subjects?
Expressive sights. So
Signs or images, expressive.
Or like the alphabet, letters of an alphabet, for example.
What does the letter of the alphabet, what object does it possess? An expressive sound possesses an object because it denotes a particular object. You could say that written words,
right? Okay, that's what
are
I'm
expressive sounds.
Yeah.
You could say that written words are expressive sounds. You see the sign that says stop and you put on the brakes, or you're not permitted, so you don't walk into the park or something like that. So expressive sounds could include that. Anything else? So let's end with a little dedication. And I like to, rather than just immediately saying these dedication prayers, not all of which are dedication. The only dedication prayer we have, there's one verse up there that's dedication often. The others are prayers of various kinds, long life prayers or whatever. Here, dedication means trying to join up in your mind, aspiring that the virtuous karma that you've created will ripen in a particular way. So think, due to these merits that I've created this morning, due to setting a good motivation, which was like the inertia making all of these actions vaguely virtuous, and my attentiveness and concentration due to these merits that were created, may they ripen in such a way that they bring about my continual spiritual development from life to life, up to and including the achievement of enlightenment for the sake of all sentient beings. And then, are you going to, you want to put up some dedication written prayers for auspiciousness? I think the center usually does that, right?
Yes.
John or Bob? No? Okay.
Oops. Not yet.
Not yet.
Okay.
Dedication. Due to the merits of these virtues, may I quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha and lead each and every living being without exception into that enlightened state. Essentially what we had mentioned before in our meditative state of dedication. Then this is a famous prayer from the praise of Manjushri, praise of Maitreya rather. May the supreme precious bodhicitta that has not arisen arise and grow, and may that which has arisen not diminish, but increase more and more. It's not called a dedication because it doesn't say due to these merits. It's just a general prayer. You who uphold the subduer's moral way, who serves as the bountiful bearer of all, sustaining, preserving, and spreading Manjunath's victorious doctrine, who masterfully accomplishes magnificent prayers, honoring the three jewels, savior of myself and others, your disciples, please, Lama Zopa, live long. Wish-fulfilling jewel, the source of every single benefits and happiness of the world, incomparably kind Tenzin Gyatso, may your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. Venerable One, Venerable Tenzin Osel, to you whose kindness exceeds that of all the conquerors, for those wanderers in far-off places, especially the West, mindful of your loving concern for us in intentionally descending again into a family of a distant land, we make this request. O Lama, please, please live long. And Geshe Sherab, who's still recovering, beloved teacher, leading your students toward wisdom and compassion, explaining through exacting discernment the steps of the stages of the path. You are the unequaled guide. Please live a long and stable life. Okay, thanks for your perseverance. Hopefully we'll have some more people next time. A couple people were on a journey for medical reasons. So enjoy and see you next week.
Thank you.